I'd like to bring the study session to order at, I'm not even ready, see? At 5:16 on June 11th, 2019. And I believe we're going to start with the community results.
Wonderful. Good afternoon. My name is Susan Miller. I'm with Cooperative Strategies. A couple weeks ago, we came before you when we were over at Adams City High School. We had just finished closing up the survey results, or I should say, the contributions from the community and parents and students, and said that we would be back to you with greater detail. And I don't believe you were there, so some of this might be a little bit more repetitive for some, but I think for others it'll be new. So hopefully, please feel free to also ask questions as we go along. It's supposed to be kind of a dialogue, and I'm happy to answer anything that you may have as best as I can. So, so we're just going to go through the background of the project, review the survey outcomes and what we found, and then moving forward with next steps. So as we had mentioned a couple weeks ago, this all kind of culminated from the efforts to move forward with best grants for the Alsop Elementary School, and those were secured, and at the time, the administration started talking about, well, what else could we possibly do in order to leverage best grant dollars for the benefit of other schools that are within our system. And so that's why the catalyst for starting the master facility plan commenced. And just a little bit of background, I'm sure all of you all know, but the average age for most of these schools are 55 years or older. The expectations of what is the value add of those schools and what should we be looking at in terms of long-term for our students for best practices for 21st century. We wanted to talk about aligning the student outcomes with the building needs. What are we expecting from these buildings, and how are they going to be helping to prepare our students moving forward? And then the catalyst, or I should say the culmination of all of these efforts, would be actually to provide a tool so that you all, the administration, would have access to information resulting identification of each needs of systems for the different schools, what the long-term viability were of those systems, help as a budgeting expectation. What do we need 3 years out, 5 years out, 7 years out, not only for just the annual appropriation of dollars, but also replacement or new build. So we talked about briefly the documented enrollment trends. What does it look like here in Adams 14? We're happy to go through that again, but we are looking at a declining district. And so that certainly has to be taken in consideration when we're looking at how we are going to be using our facilities. We also evaluated the building upgrades and what the systems presently their needs are, and we'll be going into greater detail about that later in the presentation. We are also talking about the specialization of programming. As you know, intensity of programming has evolved over the past 5, 10, 15 years. You have special ed requirements, social emotional needs, SSN programs, et cetera. So how are our schools providing for our kiddos? We also wanted to build on the process, your EMO process. You had a lot of community involvement, and that was critical for the voices to be heard, and that's critical for the purposes of this process as well for your educational facilities plan. So we wanted to build on that structure that you'd already put in place. We thought that it was critical to take the input from the community to be able to focus on how to frame those priorities. What did the community feel was critical and most important, and how did that help to frame the discussion? And the fundamental question was, what's important to the community for our children and the future of Adams 14 School District, which I think is really the crux of the matter. Where do we go from here? So, quick map, you all know where all the schools are. I just wanted to emphasize, it's a very compact area, and you're looking at the elementary schools, high schools, and the middle schools, and how they are valued by the different communities. So what we compiled is that, as we said, teamwork is just critical. We needed to get the community involved. We needed to have the administration to be working with us as well. Cooperative Strategies was putting together the meetings and doing the outreach of the community with the survey work. And then we also had a lot of help from your communications team to just be able to help us talk with as many people as we possibly could. We talked about this before as well a couple weeks ago, where we are in the timeline of where we've come from and where we need to get to by the end of July. Just a quick overview, we have had meetings almost every Tuesday with the team prior to the sending out of the survey, and then during the survey time period, we were meeting on a regular basis just to make sure we were getting out as much as we could. And we'll start back up again since the survey is completed, and we were able to get through the educational adequacy analysis, or at least putting the data in over the last week or a week and a half ago. We went to all of the schools, so we're at that point now, and then we'll be working to put together the costs of the systems for each of the schools, how they tie to the adequacy, and then the build out for the master plan and the platform that will be available on the on your internet system. So let's go through the survey real quickly, if we might. The focus was, what are the wants and needs for your facilities for 21st century? What did the community want from its school district? How best could we get the word out that we were trying to tap as many people as we possibly could, not just those that are in the schools, but also those people that actually maybe have gone through the school systems before, or live in the community, or are involved in the community. And then certainly the critical point was as well, what is this needs for operations, and what does the staff see as hot buttons that we needed to be paying attention to as well. So we wanted to get as much community feedback and build a consensus and be able to deliver to you all kind of the voice that was coming through that we were able to gather. So our initial goal was 700 completed surveys, and that was based on about estimating 10% of your student population. So you have about 7,000 children. It would be great if we had 700 responses, parents, community members, et cetera, just as a launching point. We had the surveys were available from the 15th of April through the 17th of May, and we had access both online and on paper format in both Spanish and English. So we tried to make it as easily accessible as possible. We had outreach efforts from administration here at the headquarters. We had principals pushing out through their building liaisons and through their parent organizations, and we had community members reaching out for us as well. We had family businesses leaving their surveys on counters for people to fill in when they came through. We had parents, students, administration, teachers, and community members all participating and responding. And we were ecstatic that our final result of surveys was 1,337 surveys. And just to give you a quick overview of who those individuals were that participated, we had about 435 students that participated from the high schools and the middle schools, approximately 706 parents, and 356 district employees. And some of those are overlaps as well. You know, you have parents that work in the district, and as well as our parents to children that are here. Our online responses, we had about 596 in the English space and 396 in paper responses for the English side. And then for the Spanish respondents, we had 24 online and 321 paper. So there was a really great concerted effort to get as many voices as we possibly could. Some, as you well know, some people don't have access to computers. They may have access to their phones, but surveys are kind of hard to take on phones. So I think we did a great effort, and the community members did a great effort getting out there to talk with as many people as possible. We had 11 school meetings. We had the building liaison team. We were able to meet with them and talk with them about what we were doing and how they could be helpful for us to reach out. We had the district leadership team, which was all the principals and administrators here one Friday morning. There was a number of people that went to school performances, high school breakfasts. We had went to a Kid First event. We got to the cultural council meetings. We had the student council at Lester Arnold, which was very informative. We had the Rotary Club of Adams City High School, which ended up bringing more and more people in because we had sandwiches and people heard about food and came on by to fill out the survey and get a sandwich. We canvassed neighborhoods. There was the city Rotary group. We touched base with the Historical Society and the Eagle Point Recreational Center. So we touched as many spaces as we possibly could in that period of time. So one of the questions we can get into now is the actual meat of the survey. It was basically starting to talk about the priorities and what students and parents and teachers valued and what they were looking forward for programming moving into the future. STEM certainly was one of the top. The health sciences, arts and AV technology, which is audio, visual technology, communication, human services, and education and training. The students focused in on the arts and the video with creativity side of all of that. Parents were focusing in on the health services and STEM, and district employees focused in on STEM and CTE as well. I think what was interesting was that we had also a comment field where people could add their comments about what they held as valuable and what was important. A lot of people said if you're going to be building the STEM, make sure you strengthen the sciences so that you have a clear academic pathway that ties with the actual STEM programming so that your AP offerings can tie to what you're expecting your students to be producing. There was also a conversation for the CTE ranging from the mechanics to auto body, which you guys currently have, and then there was movement into the computer engineering, which was kind of an aside, but it just tells you the range of kiddos that you've got in your school and what they're interested in. They had dreams of becoming a surgeon. Somebody, made that comment, we really need the sciences so I can become a doctor and serve as a surgeon to my community. There was students who were talking about becoming entrepreneurs and wanting to find out how to start a business and what that looked like so that they could give back as well. And then there was the building of life skills, a continuum of learning from the basics of, how do I cook and boil an egg, to the culinary arts that your students have shown prowess in with the state competitions. And also there was the pathway options discussions. We don't all want to go to college. We don't all want our students to go to college. So whether options are available that are through our programming that we can make kind of highlight for our kids. The elective programs, once again, was just a reinforcement of trying to make sure that we were kind of pulling out what was the priorities. STEM and CTE were interchangeable, 1 and 2. They were very, very close. Strong showing for advanced placement programs. A lot of that was from the high school students, not only in their responses, but also in the conversations that we had with them. They acknowledged that there were a number of AP courses that were offered, but were not able to be provided when they got to the school just because of the teaching and what was available. So that was kind of a hot button for the students at the high school level. And a couple other thoughts that didn't show up, but did show up in the comments section, which was people really did value the leadership opportunities that are available at the high school. The ROTC program, which is down on the basement floor that takes up a significant portion of that part of the facility, was highly valued. They talked about the creativity and the performing arts. A lot of the students were focusing in on that as well. And the other parts for the K-8 area was, could we have a greater diversity of field trips rather than going to the Arvada Center every year to see performances or to see other opportunities that are beyond Commerce City? Are there other field trips that we could go on, from the history museums to science museums to other art locations? So that's just something that was raised at the elementary level. Then we walked into the importance for security measures, and as you all, during this time when the survey was open, we had the threat across the Front Range. And while we were at one school actually doing one of the community meetings, we had a lock out. Yes, lock out. So Sarah and I had the opportunity to extend our conversation a little bit longer than we had expected. But it was a thoughtful conversation about just what people are looking for in security. And one of the interesting things that to note is a lot of your schools, your elementary schools, since they have been built, the vestibules and the offices are not conducive to the 21st century security that we're facing now. So as we're thinking about what the needs are moving forward for facilities, security was definitely a heightened awareness of parents, and how, shall we say, different schools had different types of processes for people walking in and out just because of the nature of how they've been built. You know, some of them don't have that extra space that stops somebody on the way in, and if they have the video and they can see somebody coming in, their office is around the corner. So it just makes,
They have that, except for the high school.
they do have the videos, but in order to get, some of them have offices that are a little bit away from the entrance, so the ability to access or just have somebody come in and veer off some different way is possible in some of the schools. So just as a highlight. Do you have any questions about that?
No.
Okay. There was also conversations about actually having presence of SROs on campus and staff being on campus, being a little bit more visible. I think there's a heightened sensitivity of bullying in the community in the late elementary, middle school, and into the high school that seemed to be coming up quite a bit. So the presence of staff being around, video cameras working a little bit more faithfully would potentially mitigate some of that concern. There was also the conversation about one positive comment I would like to highlight that day or that week that everybody was kind of going through the craziness of the Front Range. Somebody did make the comment, the professionalism of the teachers and staff and how they responded during that time period, and the communication that was going out. People felt that there was great information and they were able to understand what the risks were, and how the district was handling it. Also on security, just to backtrack a little bit, the metal detectors were mixed, as you can see. Some people believe that it's very important, while other people are saying we don't want our schools to necessarily be checking children for metal coming through the building. And a touch point, just that we all are aware of and all sensitive to right now, is just the mental health challenges for the diversity of the population that you are serving, and how that has an impact in the schools, and how that has an impact on security within the schools. So that was raised as well in many of the comments. Okay, too many different gadgets up here. Now, some of the next section was the facility and operations, and that focused more in on the specifics within the building itself, and the I guess you could say the byproducts. That, for example, the cafeteria was hot button for many of the students. They focused in on the cafeteria and the food. So, you know, the quality of the food, and I'm not sure exactly what it meant in terms of, well, we'd like different food or we'd like better food, but that was the, you know, what can the cafeteria actually provide for the students and their needs? But it was a hot button of conversation of parents and students. Other parts were, you know, the computer labs. If you go through many of the buildings, many of the computer labs have been adapted. Classrooms have been, media rooms have been adapted to be computer labs, and now with the computer labs onto carts, you know, how are we using those parts of the building more effectively and efficiently? And they're also used for testing, so sometimes they stay quiet for a long period of time and they're not used, so how do we utilize those more effectively? School staff spaces was a hot button just for planning and for how people can kind of have a space for working with each other and collaboration. Many of the schools have repurposed different rooms for different activities now. So art room is now in a regular classroom, so it doesn't necessarily have the storage that's required for providing for a comprehensive art program. Music rooms have been taken over as classrooms. So it's the utilization of the building and its classrooms for the purpose that they originally were built, and how we best move forward with utilization of the facilities, and moving in the future, how we build for that into our buildings in our planning processes. Just a side note in that space about the food. One other thing people were talking about as a suggestion was, many comments were about the bilingual programs that were offered by the district, and recognizing that there is a shortage of high-quality staffing for those, because you are offering them in a multitude of locations. So a number of people were talking about a magnet school, thinking of if you had one school where you had that bilingual program, you'd be able to take the resources and direct it specifically to that facility, and be able to provide that programming more effectively. And people were willing to drive for that. They said we'd be willing to get in the cars and drive. And transportation was an issue in some cases, but that seemed to be of interest to people. And also access to the school facilities after school, as well as during the summer, for programming, and how might they be used more effectively for the community. Move on. What were the most important factors for the school district to consider when planning for the future? The hot button was student success and achievement. Whatever you all move forward with in terms of facility planning and upgrades, improvements, the student is first. How is this going to be most effective for our students to be successful and for what they are going to achieve? So everything from college preparedness to if we're having programming that allows us to leverage community relationships, apprenticeships, internships, how does that facility provide for those opportunities? It was also conversations, we know that we're not necessarily all going to go to college, so how does our K-12 continuum and the facilities help us prepare for different avenues and pathways as we move through the district? Once again, safety and security on the school buses was important. There was just the location of existing facilities. As one of the conversations we had with the principal was, each of the schools are starting to talk about focusing in on what they might offer as special programs for students to come to. So one school might be a STEM, one school might be a STEAM, one school might be dual language. How do we effectively let people know that that's what we're offering, and does our school facility actually provide for that? So if we're going to be a STEM school, does the facility actually have the means in the classrooms and in the building to actually provide for best of practice for STEM? The same would be for a STEAM. Does our art program, really the art room, does it provide for that complement to the STEAM program? So those are just, when you're talking about the programming, and when principals are coming up before you all to talk about what they're envisioning for their future, it's what the facility can actually provide in order to deliver that programming, and then access to those programmings. How do you do that with transportation issues? The top priorities, once again, we asked questions throughout just to see if the priorities were kind of tracking. Safety and security, once again, is critical to the building itself. The conditions in the facilities, it's 55 years old or 60 years old, and the buildings are starting to feel a little bit worn, so to speak. And the carpets can't be replaced again, and the security vestibules have to be rebuilt, and the windows need to be revamped a bit. And so there's a lot of renewal replacement needs, as well as just when do we start to think about replacement? What does that look like? Let's see. So the top programming, educational programming options, which I touched on just a little bit earlier with the dual language idea, and consolidation. Dual language options were critical. support services, and I think that was all-inclusive, from the mental health to access to teachers, access to tutoring, access to intervention programs, that seemed to kind of be rippling through everybody's needs, identifying, our kids are not necessarily on grade level, so how do we get them on grade level in reading or in math? Our kids may be coming from trauma at home, how do we address those challenges in their learning environment? So those were kind of inclusive in the student support services. Ability for the facility to provide the educational program, which is what we touched on just a little bit earlier. If I'm doing a STEAM, what does that look like? What kind of attributes do I need to have? More improved programs and services, that's just more options available. And then the special education programs, facilities, how are the facilities actually addressing? Do we have pull-out programs? Do we have rooms where there's quiet spaces? How are we actually addressing all of the special need programs and the offerings that we provide? Please select a degree to which each of the following are important for planning. Once again, security and order of the building is critical, and that was on everybody's. It's not a surprise, but it's, how do we prepare and frame our buildings to be able to address these issues? And then the other students, focused in more on the safe and security within their own building. And that was, once again, the comments were focusing on, do I feel safe in my building? Maybe not so much. So how do we as administrators and staff try to be a little bit more alert to that? Other questions related to that area was, how do we communicate with our parents? Many people have those apps, the new Flyer app, but some people ask for phone calls, some people ask for it on paper. So the question is, how do we best get the information out in a transparent, clear manner so that parents are not getting the information that, hey, Mom, there was an incident at school today. When did that happen? Well, it happened at 10 o'clock this morning. Didn't you know about it? Well, no, I had no idea something happened. So it's, parents, I think, have a heightened sensitivity to that, and whether or not they're aware of what's going on in their kiddos' school. So a brief overview of who participated, which I think is really exciting information. We want to have students participate in these types of discussions about their facilities because they're the ones who live and breathe in them. They're the ones who work every day or walk every day in the hallways and are in those buildings. And we had over 400 kiddos, as I said, under 18 that actually participated. So the middle schools and the high schools, which that is that's just a great feat. So I give kudos to those individuals and principals who got those students to participate. And then we have, the 18 to 29, 30 to 39, and then it's a nice little curve. The outlier, of course, is the under 18 where you see the spike, but I think that's a great spike because that's where you want them to be. The demographics, once again, who responded. We had a number of the people were the guardians of elementary school kiddos and current students. We also had a number of people that were grandparents, preschools, parochial. We just had a wide variety, I think, of individuals that were participating, which was what we wanted, to get as many voices in as we could. And then we went forward, how long have you lived in the district, which I think kind of shows you that there's a lot of new people that have come in, and they have the 6 to 10 years is kind of your biggest portion that responded, and then the less than 2 and 2 to 5, probably you combine those two would be a little bit more. 16 to 20, we were hoping we could get more people that have been here for a while, and that, I think, were those groups of people that were actually canvassed, where people went and knocked on the doors and asked them to respond. Once again, this is just who responded and what are they affiliated with. And the question that we asked was, what schools are you affiliated with or that you're familiar with? And we had, for example, one individual who was a grandparent who had gone through all of the schools, the individual themselves, and then had their kids go through and had their grandkids now going through. So I think one individual probably checked off all the boxes, or at least a majority of them, with his kiddos and his whole family. So what did we find? We appreciated the outreach effort. One of the questions was, when do we get to see the results of the surveys and the comments that you all have gathered? And so that is one of the items that we will be putting together to deliver for you all to disperse to the principals and the team. Another focus was community partnerships. They were highly value the Kids First program and the medical facilities that are in some of the buildings, and I know there's efforts to be putting more of those facilities in other buildings, and that seemed to be one of the great appreciations of the partnerships. And they also talked about strong relationships with particular instructors in the community. So a number of students in the high schools, both at Leicester as well as at Adams City, said that they had identified with an adult in the school, which has a great impact on them staying in school and staying in the programming and being engaged. So that was, I think, one of the findings that we were pleasantly surprised with. What we found, once again, is just ties back to what, you guys have been focusing on anyway with the EMO, is student achievement and how do we keep our kids here and keep our facilities strong and keep the student achievement moving in the right direction and working to get kids on grade level. There was a greater transparency for the accountability of the board to community, and that's been building with you guys doing more outreach and more efforts going to different schools. So I think that's in the building phase. The availability, oh gosh, I'm having a tough time. Availability of student support services, what's available within the buildings themselves, and how do students have access? So that could be healthcare, that could be the social workers, that could be anything from teachers that value the students. So it's just the students feeling that they have access to the right individuals and people. And then improved communication between the school administrations and the community, which I think once again goes back to the good job that was done at the time. We had the craziness on the Front Range that we were all going through. So the next steps, where do we go from here? As we had mentioned a couple weeks ago, we were going to be walking through all of the schools to look at the educational adequacy of every single facility, and we went through all of the elementaries, middles, and high school, and we'll tie all of that now to the review of the systems and identifying the priorities, what systems are starting to kind of fall short, which ones are expiring, which ones have been replaced and renewed and are going to have another extension of life. So we'll be tying that with the adequacy. And then as we mentioned earlier, there will be the deliverable will be that dashboard that you all will have access to see real-time, real information about where those costs are coming from, what we're looking at on an annual basis at 2 years out, 3 years out, 5 years out. So there can be strong planning on the capital asset side. And then looking at how do we fund. If we are looking at replacing a building, how do we plan on replacing it? Do we do consolidation? Do we do, what's the planning process, and how do we fund that? Do we look at long-term debt? Do we talk about annual allocation, putting money aside for planning purposes to maybe not do a whole redo, but maybe a partial redo? And then there's also just the ongoing annual replacement. We have to budget certain capital aside every single year, and is it adequate with what we're doing right now? Or because of the age of our buildings and our long-term planning, we might need to be thinking about putting more aside in capital every year into the budget as we move forward with the capital program. And then, once again, keeping the dialogue going with the community, giving this information back to the community and talking about the status of their facilities so that they would know as well what the nature is of need for facilities and what the long-term view is going to be. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. And I did find out, by the way, Ms. Marino, all of the bond authorizations that took place over the past couple of rounds, so I have that information for you as well.
Do you have a copy of the actual survey with you?
Do we have a copy of the survey? John can get one. He has one in the office. Could you get a few of them, actually? Thank you.
Thank you.
That would be helpful.
I just wanted to, I took the survey, I believe, at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so I just, I don't remember all the questions, and so
Right.
just wanted to see them.
Yeah,
again.
absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
The slide on how long folks have lived in the district, the not applicable was fairly high. Was that just like folks who didn't fill out the question?
Yes.
Or okay.
So there is a sensitivity to information that would be given.
Got it.
Wonder why.
Did you hear any, I know you talked about some of the concerns, I guess, that the community had. Did any of them, or did you see a prominent role of them focus on anything having to do with curriculum, or was it mostly just facilities?
Well, it was, does our facility provide for the necessary space to
Okay.
deliver what we're being asked to deliver for our students? And some of the questions about the curriculum were actually raised about whether or not the curriculum was appropriate for the student population that we were serving. So were we using curriculum that may be better served in a different socioeconomic environment? Where our kids are walking in the door is a little different than perhaps where Cherry Creek children are walking in the door. That doesn't mean that they can't get on grade level, but the interventions need to be different. And so that type of questioning of that curriculum was definitely in the survey results.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have the year-end data report with Jamie Ball.
Good evening, President Quintana and distinguished members of the board. It's always a pleasure to be able to come and share our end-of-the-year data findings with you so that we have kind of a pulse on what to expect when the school performance frameworks come out in August. As you'll hopefully notice, the reporting presentation this time looks a little bit different. The Accountability and Assessment Department have been working very hard with a Tableau consultant to increase our capabilities with visual analytics. And so if you have any feedback at the end of this to the different graphics that we've used, we would love your feedback so that we can continue to improve how we present the data to you. But our goal is to make it as understandable as possible. So hopefully it looks a little bit different than the previous 3 data presentations. What I first wanted to start out with is our early literacy efforts. I had the presentations focus on the percentage of students that are at or above in early literacy. So the students who are showing that they have the foundational literacy skills to be able to read at grade level. What you will see on this first graph is kindergarten and first grade, and it shows the students who entered at the beginning of the year, the percentage of students who were able to, at the beginning of the year, read at or above benchmark, and then the comparison to the end of the year. And if you look at our kindergarten data, this is the highlight of tonight's data presentation. We are seeing some incredible growth metrics here in especially ALSUP, where 89% of the students leaving kindergarten are leaving with foundational reading skills. And so that is a huge change from last year, and I don't know if you don't remember last year in our kindergarten data, it actually declined.
Yeah.
And so to have a complete turnaround and start to see all the schools did increase, but to have the kind of increases we saw at ALSUP, we saw strong growth as well in the students at Central, DuPont, Kemp. These are really early signs of the success that we're seeing with the new curriculum that we have adopted, the efforts of Schools Cubed in supporting our schools to focus on early literacy. As we move to the first grade slide on the right-hand side, the results, if we look at how kindergarten students were last year moving into first grade, you can see that our results are not nearly as strong as our kindergarten results, and we have some serious concerns with the first grade students that next year we will be moving into second grade. If you notice, we have 4 schools where approximately 20 to 25% of the students are able to read at or above benchmark. So these are students that we're sending on to second grade without being able to read whole words. And so we know as an instructional department, we are going to have to flood not only the first grade to improve the efforts, but we are going to have to do some deep interventions with that second grade group because we are not seeing the results from that first grade moving into second grade. So we have some areas of focus that we know we have to work on as we move forward into next year. When we move to the second and third grade, we are seeing average of about 40-ish% of the students being able to read at or above. Monaco in the third grade had a spike, and they are up to about 60%. But again, these are nowhere near the expectations that we need to see. They are definitely better than where we were last year. We have more work to do. I would like to report out that Schools Cubed in our early literacy department, they have met with each school's leadership, and they have gone student by student to identify exactly what those students need at the beginning of the year so that there is no downtime. As we head into fourth and fifth grade, again, we're seeing approximately 30 to 45% of our students in the fourth and even less than that in our fifth grade reading at or above benchmark. We know that it's critical for students to read at grade level by the time they finish third grade. It takes much longer to fill the gaps in fourth and fifth grade. We are seeing some early signs of success with our SIPS intervention. We did an extra support at Rose Hill with a specialist who worked directly with the SIPS intervention program, and if you see the results in the fifth grade at Rose Hill, we went from 6 students and up to 34 students in about a 2.5-month time. So we know that the SIPS intervention program works, and now we need to expand our efforts. I wanted to give you a comparison of the progress from 17-18 to 18-19, so you can kind of understand that even though our results aren't where we want them to be, we have made huge gains. If you look at Alsep Elementary and Central Elementary, they are making above average progress in the K-3 reading. DuPont, Kemp, and Monaco are making average progress, which is still an improvement from where they were in 17-18. Hanson and Rose Hill are the 2 exceptions, and so the literacy department alongside the instructional department know that we have to provide additional supports at those 2 schools to turn their literacy programming around because their results are not where we need to see them. Before I move on, do you have any questions specific to K-3 literacy?
I don't know if I should ask this now or later, but the literacy results that you're showing for Dibbles, is that for English-only students?
Right now, we just did the overall for English, but this includes all students.
Okay, so
we
English
haven't
and ELL.
disaggregated out the students who took the EDEL as well to cross-reference that, but we are building out that workbook and should have that available shortly. Currently, we don't have the ability to pull a data report that has those students side by side, so we have to send it to our data specialist who has to pull those 2 data sets together, and then we can look at it because we have to identify it by student, and it's a little bit trickier. So we're in the process of that, but this is the overall based on English. So like if you look at Alsep's data in kindergarten, even though they have biliteracy, the Spanish literacy course, this reports out that 89% of all of their students are able to read at or above in English.
Okay.
Any other questions about early literacy? Okay, we're going to go into our STAR assessment, which is what we find to be a predictor of what we will see on the school performance framework. So our STAR math percentile rank, this is the national peer comparison. We set our district expectation a little bit higher than the state expectation because we want our students to get up to the 60th percentile. We are seeing a strong correlation between STAR's percentile rank and the CMAS percentile rank, and so we want to try to set that as close as possible to achievement on what we see on the school performance framework. What you will see that across math is that we are seeing in most of our schools some gains, not significant. And so based on this, I would predict that we're going to not see a whole lot of change in the achievement indicator of the school performance framework. When we look at our STAR reading percentile rank, same thing, we find a strong correlation between the STAR reading data and that of the CMAS reading. Unfortunately, we don't have a writing component to STAR, and so it's not an exact science to make a prediction on how we're going to do on CMAS because it combines both reading and writing. But what we do see is that the students who perform approximately at the 51st percentile are the students that are meeting the CMAS achievement indicator. And so if you look at this data, we're still well below where we need to be meeting the state academic achievement expectations. The data is pretty stagnant again, and so if we were to make a prediction of what we are going to see in our school performance framework, it should be very similar to what we saw last year. When we look at our STAR growth, again, this is kind of what helps us understand whether or not we're closing the achievement gaps, or are the gaps going to maintain as they have been, or are they going to get bigger? The general understanding of STAR is anywhere between 35 and 55 is what we would consider average. That's to just maintain the achievement gaps as we currently have. If we can get over 55, that's when we start to close the achievement gaps. Anything below 35 is when we start to see the gaps get larger. This data is very similar to what we saw last year. Most of our schools performed in the mid-40s to low 50s. We're seeing the same data coming out of the schools again this year. So if I were to make a prediction on what we're going to see on the school performance frameworks, again, it's going to be very similar to what we saw last year. There's no real highlights of, wow, that's kind of interesting data. We see Kemp, as we know, Kemp had some pretty strong data coming out last year, and it showed on their school performance framework as well. If we were to do the STAR growth progress summary, this is an overall of both the math and reading. We are making average progress in most situations. In Hanson, in math, we are below average. Rose Hill, in math, we're below average. Reading at Central, and these would be indicative of the 4th and 5th graders at the elementary schools. So Central Elementary, it would be the 4th and 5th grade. In reading is below average, and Monaco as well.
Ms. Ball, when I was reviewing this information earlier, the thing that stood out to me, in which I think we should be pretty concerned about, is the middle schools. They were our real outliers last time in terms of the growth that they had achieved, and which translated to their ranking on the
Absolutely.
school performance framework.
Yep. And that is a discussion that we have been having as an instructional team. It's discussions, that we're having with the middle school principals. They're very concerned as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see a dip from Kearney down into the improvement category, and we might see a dip in Adams City Middle School down into priority improvement. They barely made improvement last year, and so they're right on the cusp of dropping back, especially when we look forward a couple slides to the access data. Our access data is not showing what we would expect to see as strong as last year, and the middle schools and the secondary schools all had really strong English language proficiency growth, and because we had such a high showing last year, it kind of stagnated this year. And so there's that potential that that language proficiency is going to drop as well.
What do you think caused that?
I mean, at this point, I would speak to the department heads who are in charge of programming. So if you want specific to language proficiency, I can ask Ms. Lopez to come up.
Okay.
I don't want to speak on her behalf.
Good evening. So I think when we're looking at language growth, we have to look at it in a couple of ways. And Access tells us to look at it very carefully when we're thinking about growth. When students are moving from a level 1 to a level 2, they say that should take about a year. When they're moving from a level 2 to level 3, that should take 2 years. 3 to 4 is 3 years on. So it takes more than 1 year to move between levels, and it differs between the levels. So learning a language isn't necessarily something that happens in a progression. As educators, we would really hope that it would, and we'd expect a specific amount of growth. And so that's the specific amount of growth we'd want. So that could be one reason. So we need to always remember that language grows a little differently than other skills. And the second thing to remember is that last year the cut scores changed, and so we dropped from a 5.0 to a 4.0, being able to reclassify or move out of ELD. And so that means that we are left with students who are 3s, and it will take them 2 years to move on to being a 4. So when we reclassified and moved out all of the 4s and 5s last year, it's just now that we have a slower movement between 3 and 4 this year. So those are a couple of reasons that we can think about. Another reason we should probably consider as well is when I talked to you all a month ago, thinking about the amount of time and dedication that we've been thinking about language. So it wasn't a focus of the district this year. We didn't have goals around language development. It wasn't part of goals for the schools. And moving forward into next year, we have created a goal. My department has really strong goals around this growth. Every principal has created an L goal, a goal around their English language learners, and we've created some district look-fors that we're really excited about, making sure that we have students talking in class to start moving that reading data. And so it could be lots of different issues. It could just be how we learn language, and it can also be our attention to language. But we are making some adjustments in my department, as well as with principals and the larger instructional department, to make sure that we're actually talking about language, and it's really a part of the forefront of how we're doing business in Adams 14.
You said something right when you started. We didn't have a goal last year.
So, I mean, as a district, we didn't really focus on literacy goals or moving English language learners, or really honing our work towards that. And if you remember, starting at the beginning of this school year, the goal for my department was to create a department and make sure that we have all of the things in place that usually the departments have in place, and
Because you didn't have them.
we didn't have them.
Okay.
And so we have them now, and as an instructional team, we've been thinking about, we've really set some goals around English language learners. Because they are more than 50% of our students, we feel very strongly, we know that if we move those students, we move the rest of the district, and we're not going to move the rest of the district unless we're talking about English language learners.
Thank you.
Any other questions regarding STAR? So the next set of data I wanted to present are what we consider the ABCs of dropout prevention. You have attendance, you have behavior, and you have course completion or credits earned. And I know we've talked a lot about dropout prevention over this past year, and I just want to remind you that the data for this coming school performance and district performance framework we already have, because we get that data in January. And we know that our dropout rate is about the same as it was the previous year. And so we're really not making gains towards reducing the number of dropouts that we have. And so we have to look at this in a different lens, because it seems like we focus our efforts and our conversations around secondary schools, and what are we doing with secondary schools to help decrease the dropout rates. And if we look at the research that comes out of the Johns Hopkins, they talk about first grade is when we see the at-risk indicators already showing up. And so if we can start to look at this as a bigger system approach and start providing interventions not only for attendance, but interventions for behaviors and interventions so that the students that are in elementary have the literacy and the math skills that they need, over the long term, we will see a decline in the dropout. When we look at our attendance, one of our superintendent and one of your goals this year for us was to have 95% attendance. And as you can see, most of our schools did not meet that goal.
But on the average, the majority of them did above 90.
The majority did above 90. But when we look at the percentage of truant students, 30% of our students in this district are classified as truant. They have the at-risk indicator of attendance, which means we need to start intervening and providing the appropriate supports around attendance. And we need to do this starting all the way back in first grade.
Very true.
When we look at the second indicator of dropout prevention, it's behavior. And we are showing, and this data indicates the percentage of students who have received an in-school suspension or an out-of-school suspension resolution to an incident they were involved in. So approximately 2 to 3% of our students throughout the year are being in-school suspended or out-of-school suspended. And again, we start seeing these behaviors as early as elementary school. And it's generally, when we look at our at-risk dashboard, it's the same kids from year to year to year. You can basically pinpoint which kids you predict will have the behavior issues. And so we have to do a better systematic job of intervening with behavior in mind. Then the other chart that I'm presenting, and I know that this one's a little bit hard to read, so I'm going to try to explain it to the best of my ability from afar. If we look at the very bottom line of this chart, it says total Fs per unique student in a core class. And then along the bottom, you see the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that's reporting out 2017, 2018 data. So if I read that 12th grade, we had 99 students in the 12th grade who failed one core class. We had 50 students in the 12th grade who failed 2 core classes. We have 35 students in the 12th grade that failed 3 core classes. We had 25, I think that's a 25, maybe 26 students who failed 4 core classes. And it goes down from there. What I'd like to point out is the high numbers in 9th and 10th grade. Again, the research says that 9th grade is the most critical year to have academic success lead to completion of high school. And if we look at our 9th grade data, we have a very large number of our students failing at least 1 core class. And it starts before 6th grade. We reported out on 6th grade, But what I want to show you is that the numbers really don't change. We know who the students are who are failing courses way back into elementary. And so it's critical that we provide the appropriate interventions academically starting in the elementary schools so that students have the skills that they need so when they go to the higher levels, they can perform at grade level.
Ms. Ball, can I just verify real quick? Core classes, do we mean English, math, science, and social studies?
Yep, and then because this goes up to like 13, I believe, each semester would count as one. So one math, one reading, one science, one social studies for the first semester, one math, one reading, one science, one social studies. So for most students, especially at the middle school, you have 8 possible ways to earn credits. You have some scenarios at Lester Arnold High School and Adams City High School that are unique because they do credit recovery and things like that. So there's the potential for there to be more. I do know that at Kearney, there's reporting out like a student here and there, and we did notice that in the transcript, there's just a duplicate of a course that's showing up. So there's some abnormalities, but that's maybe a handful of students. But my point is, the data isn't really showing significant change. And we know that the same number of students basically in 6th grade are failing the classes in 7th grade, and the same number is going to 8th grade and on and on. And we, as a district, keep focusing our efforts on secondary as though this is a problem that's unique to them. And I just want to point out that our efforts have to begin at a much, much earlier stage. And so I know my department has worked very closely with a consultant to revamp the at-risk dashboard so that with a click of a button, we can, the school leaders can identify which students are showing 2 or more of these at-risk indicators so that we can provide better student support team conversations, that we can provide interventions at an earlier age. But it's a matter of setting up programming pre-K-12 so that the interventions are there. So when we do recognize a student needs an intervention, we have the system built to provide the intervention. When we look at our access data, I know Ms. Lopez already spoke to the data. I just wanted to present to you this average scale score change from 18 to 19 because it's pretty indicative of what our teachers saw on their teacher evaluation. This data closely aligns to, I believe it's like 15% of the teacher evaluation pie. We did not see a whole lot of movement in the secondary schools. You can see that Adams City Middle School actually declined a little bit. Kearney Middle School as well declined. Very little change at Adams City High School, and just a little bit of movement from Lester Arnold. And we know that once the kids get to secondary schools, they are generally in that 3 and 4 category that Ms. Lopez was talking about, and it takes them a little bit longer. And so in some sense, yes, this is what we expect to see, is that the secondary schools will have less change because it takes a little bit more to see the change. But I wanted to show you that our data right now is predicting that we're not going to see the strong growth in secondary as we did last year. The last slide that we have kind of shows us where the kids moved to. So if we look on that far left column, it says 2018 performance. So in 2018, if a student was in that 1 category, they were what we consider our NEP 1s. And then it shows us the movement for the 2019. Did they stay a 1? Well, 69 of the students who were a 1 in 2018 remained a 1 in 2019, and that's not typical. We expect to see them move to a 2 or more within that first year. We did see 83 students move to a level 2, which is expected. We saw 88 students actually move up 2 categories to a 3, which is fantastic. And we actually saw 6 kids move up to a level 4, so that's very promising data right there. When we look at the 2s, unfortunately, we had 30 students move back to a 1. We had 135 students stay in the 2 category. We had 153 students move up a category, which is what we are expecting to see. And we had 25 students actually move up to a 4, which is fantastic. If you notice in our 3 category, the majority of our students who were 3s stayed 3s. We had 500 students remain in the same category, and that's kind of where our long-term ELLs, we call it, they kind of get stuck. And so we have to be very intentional about the instruction and supports that we provide them so they don't stay there for year after year after year. Same thing is happening in our 4s. We have 210 students who were stuck in that 4 category. And so we know that we have to focus our efforts in our 3s and 4s to get them to move up to 4s and 5s. And that concludes the data presentation for our end of year. I know we just barely received today our SAT and PSAT data. However, it's not the official data that's released by CDE. Early indicators is that 9th grade made some improvements, but 10th and 11th did not. And that's indicative in the data that I showed you. So again, that it's not official, it's not the cleaned up version of the data, but based on the data that was presented to us last year, just to give you a quick kind of overview of the data that has been released. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, I do. Looking at this risk, if we're not changing, have you looked at maybe we're not running the right system? And by that I mean 3 of us come under the traditional 1 through 6, 7 through 9, 10 through 12. Maybe we don't, if we keep staying on this, and I'm a firm believer that when education went into the middle school concept, grades started dropping, students started dropping. Maybe we have to take a look at some other way so we can look at these kids, because I firmly believe 9th graders shouldn't be up at the high school. You know, if we have a group of upperclassmen that are ditching, that are not working, not going to class, what do you think our 9th graders are going to do? They learn from what they see. I firmly believe that our elementary should be 1st through 5th grade. Then we should have a middle school, whatever you want to call it, 6th through 7th, and then an 8th through 9, then 10th through 12. But I think if we're just staying right the same, and which we are as I look at the dropout rate, it was the same ever since we went through middle school. Every year we come in with 500 to 600 freshmen, and every year we graduate about 300 seniors. So we always lose half. So maybe it's the concept of the way we have our system that is it, and I'm just saying maybe we ought to look at some other way.
I think if we look at the at-risk percentages, at our high school, we have 50% of our students with 2 or more of the indicators. That's half of our students. It's very hard to personalize interventions when 50% of your students need intense interventions and all types of interventions. And so I think, Mr. Rolla, you're right. We need to look at how can we change this up, because the data isn't changing. Until we can go back and start providing these interventions right away. We're seeing it in kindergarten data. We changed up how we approached things, and we saw some significant gains in kindergarten, and we expect to see over time that those data points continue to rise. And so right now we're with a system where we've passed and moved kids on, and the gaps got bigger, and their at-risk indicators multiplied, and they need more supports than just academic. They need behavior supports, they need attendance supports, they're checking out of school, they're disengaging, and so we've got to make sure that we have a system of supports that can capture those kids that are falling through the cracks, and making sure that we're intervening at a much sooner rate.
Ms. Ball, to your point about the number of students that require intensive interventions, how does that then influence the structure around course offerings and credit recovery?
So that's a really tricky scenario when we're working even with the elementary schools to try to arrange interventions within the 7.5 hour school day. It's very difficult within that time frame to provide the multiple offerings without sacrificing like a science or a social studies or a PE class or, something like that. It's very, very hard to provide that. So when we start getting multiple intervention needs, it's almost impossible to meet the needs of students, and it's even more complicated when you get to high school because they have credits they need to earn in specific areas in order to graduate. And so we have to be looking at summer school, is our summer school offerings running the interventions that we need, or is it after-school tutoring, or is there a more unique way that we can provide support for the students?
I had two questions. The first one is, when you were talking to Dominic, something came up to me. Do you think having longer school days would benefit? I know you were talking about how difficult it is to implement an intervention during a 7.5 hour day. Do you think that if we were to elongate it or extend the day to like 8 hours at least, would that half hour would make a difference? Or do you think it's just too much that we would need more?
Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you for believing that I have all the answers.
It's just your opinion.
In my opinion, I think there are creative ways to have extended school days, especially for students who have the need for intervention. So possibly extending the school day for just that percentage of students who are needing it would be of benefit, absolutely. Or starting this, like if it's a middle school, maybe starting it earlier and having a flex schedule. But there's a lot of different ideas out there that we need to look into.
And my second question is, are parents aware of these scores? Do they have access to them? I was looking at Infinite Campus, and I don't know if I see those scores for my kids. So I want to know if parents have direct access to it, or do they have to go to
So
the
we
school?
upload, every time we have a benchmark window, the assessment data into the assessment tab. I'm not sure what you see on your end. That might be something we would need to explore together. When I look at my son, who's up in a different school district, they use Infinite Campus, I can see all of his assessment history. And so it might just be a matter of informing parents on how to find that data. And the other part of it is making sense of what does a 558 mean, and so having some literature or some training around what does it mean and how can I help.
Yeah, I think for me personally, just being able to access those, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, but if I were to kind of know where I can access those test scores for my children, then maybe it'd be easier for also parents to understand how they can help or where exactly their students fall. Because sometimes parent-teacher conferences is not enough, or when you send report cards and you see all these grade levels and, you try to understand it and you're still blank. And so just seeing that information in the app and Infinite Campus, and then being able to translate it into how I can help or ideas of how I can work with the teacher, then we can probably maximize those test scores. So
Absolutely.
if you
And,
can help me with that.
Excuse me. Maybe we could set you up with Brandon. Would he be able to?
I could, if you just reach out,
Okay.
and we can set up a time, I'll walk you through it. The other thing too is just, coming in 2 years ago, to not having anybody return from the assessment and accountability department, building a department again. We've, I think, come a long ways in just being able to provide data analytics and reporting, having this year where I've met with you consistently. Next year, I have a whole added plan that does involve each school reporting out to parents, because we do need to increase the parent input and support around data.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome.
And just real quick to, piggyback off of what Ms. Martinez just brought up, I think having that personalized profile of how your student's doing, I think could be of real benefit, because I think there are plenty of parents out there who want to help, they just don't know how, right?
Absolutely.
Or what their student is struggling with, and so that could be a real benefit.
And I know that that's one of the key elements to getting a district out of turnaround. That's one of the areas of focus, is making sure that we work with parents so they know, how can I help my child with literacy or math or, and providing those skills. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And that brings an end to our study session at 6:30. And we will move into
In 10 minutes.
5 minutes.
Better make it quick, Rolla.
5 minutes.